Our film begins with Officer Paul in the year 1999 in Louisiana, watching the movie Top Hat and crying. He tells his colleague Eli that the movie reminded him of his life in the year 1935, when he was working as a correctional officer at Cold Mountain Prison. He shares with her that he was responsible for the condemned Amber and supervised all the executions he documented. And that Amber was called Top. Because the Amber Flow was treacherous to us earlier, the film's events return to the year 1935. Paul, a young officer, along with his assistants Lino, Harry and Brutal, and the dim-witted officer Percy Wetmore, they all receive John Coffey, the biggest prisoner Paul has ever seen in his life. They enter his cell. He goes back to his office and reads John's file. It said that one day, two girls, Katie and Cora, were taken from their home, and their father, Klaus, started looking for them. He found a trail of blood on the doorstep, called the police, and began searching with the townspeople until they found them dead, with John crying by their side. They told him he could not help them. He was then arrested for the rape and murder of the girls. Paul submits his report to Hal Morris, the prison warden, who tells him his wife Melinda is suffering from severe seizures. He asks him to be lenient with Percy since he's the nephew of the state governor's wife and they don't need more problems from the governor. However, Percy might leave soon because he's received a job offer as an administrator at a private mental health hospital. So he hands him the execution letter of a prisoner named Alan Bitterbuck. One time, while they were in the office, Proto the mouse was spotted inside the prison. They kept watching until it entered the solitary confinement area, where they evacuated the room, hoping to catch the mouse. However, they failed, and it reappeared in front of Percy the next day. Percy immediately tried to kill it, and Shane chased after it to kill it too, but they both failed. Paul and Peter Pointer start to pay attention when the cat bursts into the cell again. This time the cat hopes to catch the mouse but fails again. He orders Paul to put everything back in the cell and leaves to complete preparations for Arlene's execution. One of the procedures for the electric chair was a mock drill with the prisoner to verify that all the processes were in order. Percy overheard them discussing how to operate the electric chair switches and learned to start it from Officer Van Hay. Then he asked, why do we put a wet sponge on the prisoner's head? They told him and explained that this way the electricity would reach the brain quickly, causing death without much pain from the electricity. Then they prepared the execution chamber for a procedure scheduled precisely for 10 o'clock in the morning. And Percy was saying goodbye in a mysterious way, while Daly was acting agitated and told him that an administrative job was waiting for him so not to leave the prison. Percy replied and said if they didn't let them perform an execution like the protocol, he would be suspended. Paul was left behind, returning to his office but overhearing laughter coming from Dale's cell, noticing he was also playing with the mouse, which he named Mr. Jingles. He summons them to his office and informs them about a new prisoner named William who is quite troublesome. His latest trouble involved killing 3 people during a robbery, including a pregnant woman. They asked Paul about the condition of his desires. He replied and told him that the tumor is severe. There's no way he could have surgery or be treated because of the lock. After getting home, a severe pain woke him up, making him rush out to not disturb John, his wife. The next day, he asks his wife to make a doctor's appointment because the pain is still severe and ongoing. Then he heads back to the prison to receive the new inmate, William, who upon entering the cell starts hitting those around him until Brutal arrives from behind and hits him on the head, throwing him into a cell. Paul is astounded. The cell is left alone and John walks up to him and says, come closer. John unexpectedly places his hand where the pain is and Paul suddenly feels relief. John looks at him and says, I've healed you. Paul happily returns home without pain. The next day, back at the prison, he gives John food and thanks him for his help. William's problems continued until they decided to throw him into solitary confinement and discipline him their way. During Dale's execution, Brutal and Paul come in to ensure the mouse stays with someone, and during this, Mr. Jingles runs away from William. Fabulous sits on a chair and they beat him up. He collapses and cries because of his pet mouse's death. But John catches him, puts it in his hand and carries the body that saved Mr. Jingles. He revives it from the beginning, old and new. The warden goes to him and tells him that this is his last execution. After that, he will leave the prison and go somewhere else. And indeed he does. They agree with him and the guard supervises the placement of the damp sponge that makes the prisoner die without pain, but he's unqualified and places it on his head while it's dry. The execution happens in the worst possible way and the entire prison staff knows the guard did it on purpose to torture him. The prisoner loses his mind from the agony and strikes the guard until someone intervenes and asks what happened, learning that the guard was the cause but does nothing because of his connections. On the second day, Paulo and his wife visit Melinda several times to check on her because she's deteriorating. Afterwards, he holds a meeting at his house with the whole prison team except for Percy and tells them he decided to release John Coffey from prison and take him to Melinda to try to help her in his own way. He starts implementing his plan, which involves drugging William with a sedative in Pepsi and throwing Percy into a cage. John and they get out of prison and go home. He gets Bob to tell them he might help his wife, so they let him go to her, and really John manages to heal her with his method. They go back to prison and open the cell door for Pierce, telling him it's time to leave. Pierce steps out of the cell, but they catch John. He transfers his pain to him in his own way. He stayed like he was hypnotized, moving in sync with William. He raised he raised his gun and shot William with all the bullets he had. Few bullet attacked they punished both of them together because he saw what William did. Give me a hand, let me show you what William did. In some way, we weren't shown that William was friends with Klaus, the father of the two girls who were said to have been infected and abused by him. The stars were trying to heal them like Tom and Jerry, but they failed. The investigation into William's murder stuns them, but Bersel has lost his mind. He goes to a mental hospital, but as a patient. At this moment, Paul is convinced of John's innocence and offers to help him escape if he wants. But John replies that he's ready to die because he is tired of the loneliness, the darkness, and the world. When Paul asks John if he has a last wish, John mentions he has never seen a motion picture. So Paul and the others play top hat for him, and they all watch the movie together. Then, on the execution day, John Coffey asks not to have his face covered because he's afraid of the dark, and the execution proceeds. And then, and this is the end of the story that Joel Ismailov tells at the care home, saying that afterward he requested to be transferred to a juvenile prison. You might ask how come these events happened in 1939 and now it's 1999. Like you lady like you've lived very long. She said to him, I've lived because of the miracle healing John did. I've lived a long time and will live even longer. To see all my loved ones succumbing to illnesses like I did and lose my son and colleagues and still be around to attend your funeral and everyone I've ever known feels like a weakness. Maybe being weak is what makes one endure. I just wish I could find peace soon and reunite with all my loved ones.